Well, welcome all. Welcome.
Okay.
Welcome. This is the Pacific Zen Institute Luminary Series, and we have with us Thomas Yuho Kirchner, who came out with a new translator, a new book. He's a translator and has translated some really key uh, books for us. He did the Record of Linji. He did Entangling Vines. He did Dialogs in a Dream, and just came out last year with Dahui's Letters. The great thing about Tom is that we got a chance to meet him in Japan a time ago, and as we were talking about in before coming on, it was really wonderful because we got to know him at Tenryu-ji, which is the temple that he lives in Kyoto. But he also took us on a tour of his garden, which was just so lovely. And Tom, I wanted to thank you for coming back again. You were actually our first speaker in this series back in 2022.
Okay. I didn't realize I was the first person ever to participate in this. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, gosh, let's begin. We're talking tonight about Dahui, and Dahui was one of the
The
greatest.
books, by the way.
Yeah, Dahui was one of the greatest Zen masters in one of the greatest dynasties of all of China. And so I'd like to just ask Tom. He gives some background in his introduction, just to tell us what was going on in China in the Song Dynasty at that time.
Yeah. I mean, pretty much every dynasty has its own characteristics, and they all are great in their own ways. But the Song Dynasty was a time of tremendous technological uh, innovation and development, not only technological in a material sense, but also development, philosophical development. The various schools of Neo-Confucianism, which in many ways uh, they regarded themselves as a return to some of the original teachings of Confucianism. They
And Chan was important in that, right? Didn't Neo Confucianism come and bring some sort of a spirit, or Chan bring some sort of spirit to Neo Confucianism?
Well, so a lot of these people, I think, was the Cheng brothers. They were sort of anti-Zen, but in point of fact, you're quite right. A lot of Chan ideas, like the possibility, particularly the possibility of anyone attaining sagehood. Uh, this was an idea that existed in original Confucianism, apparently, but had kind of been lost over the ensuing centuries, and a person should live, a righteous life and fulfill their duties, etc., etc. But the idea of actually becoming a sage, in in other words, a living embodiment of the Tao, someone
Hmm.
who manifested the Tao in their everyday life, this had sort of disappeared as an impossibility for modern people. But with the new Confucianisms that came back,
Hmm.
and this, of course, involved a form of meditation that was obviously influenced by the Chan thought that had been extremely popular in Japan for hundreds of years by that time.
Yeah. So, what was Dawi's life like in that Chan Buddhist system? Chan had become the dominant Buddhist school towards the end of the Tang Dynasty, I guess. And here we have Dawi, who is a master and communicating with a lot of the literati of the era, right? Some of
Right.
the top officials in the emperor's government.
Mhm. Um, how did that relate to?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
what was the context in which he was living and working and studying?
Well, as I mentioned, a number of the most influential of the figures in Neo-Confucianism, which was in many ways the sort of predominant philosophical milieu among the scholar officials, the literati, uh, were anti-Zen, and yet the actual practitioners, the neocon supposedly neo-Confucianist officials, sort of ignored the supposed antipathy between the two traditions, and while identifying themselves with Neo-Confucian, were enthusiastic practitioners of Zen because they saw no contradiction in the practice. There is this concept in Neo-Confucianism, again going back to the origins, but developed in Neo-Confucianism, of Li. You'd have to sort of see the character. It is usually translated into English as principle. It is the underlying. It's very, very hard to translate it. Principle is, that which comprises the essence out of which the phenomenal world comes. The unconditioned that lies at the source of all that is conditioned. But it is also referred to as pattern because it provides the pattern out of which all of the various phenomena exist. So we have in our essence our own principle, our own be. Maybe if I'm getting a little too detailed here, just tell me. That if we awaken to, we reconnect with the universal.
Okay. Yeah.
And of course, this fits in very well with the Zen idea of Buddha nature. And this is how basically the literati were interpreting it. So these very high officials, nominal Neo-Confucianists, were very, very interested in practice. I think that the personality of Dahui, of course, played a large part in this. He was an extremely intelligent, even though he did not receive a classical education, as far as we know. He was very, very well studied, not only in the Confucianist thought, but ancient Indian thought, etc. He was someone that these people could talk to on an equal level. And some of them were very, very dedicated to practice. So he was someone they would naturally turn to. I don't. Why him and not some of the other? At some point, I just have to interpret. I have to attribute this to the personal qualities of Dahui. Something about him was very, very attractive to these extremely intelligent people that were running the Song Dynasty government. And this is another feature, I think, of the Song Dynasty that relates to what you just mentioned, the connection between Zen and, of course, Dahui and all of these high officials and why they became his disciples. One of the innovations of the Song Dynasty, something that had always been present since maybe the Zui, we're talking about, many centuries prior to the Song Dynasty, the imperial examination system, where they decided to select the people that would lead the government on both the local and the national level through meritocracy, basically, as measured by this very, very difficult literary examination. But in point of fact, prior to the Song, the majority of the country's leaders were still selected through family connections and social status. But with the initiation of the Song Dynasty, the original emperor in charge of it decided to reintroduce and give far more weight to the examination system. So a farmer's son who scored at the top of the examination system could end up in the highest areas of the Chinese government. So you have the intelligentsia. Zen has always, I think the contemplative traditions in any religion I would say, tend to attract the intelligentsia. People who really, think things through and start wondering, what is the nature of existence? People that are concerned with philosophical issues. So you had these very, very, the cream of the crop uh, of the intelligentsia actually running the government, and these were the sort of people that were interested in the contemplative life. So that is, you know, this is the
And
real.
they became good friends. In fact, Morton Schluter, who we had on the series a couple of years ago, he talked an awful lot about how it was the intelligentsia of the government would actually choose the abbots of these public monasteries, and you couldn't be included in the transmission documents unless you were one ahead of one of these monasteries and chosen by the literati. So they had a big influence, at least on the administrative level of the uh, of the Chan Zen movement at the time.
Yeah, Schluter's discussion, I think, is revelatory, extremely convincing, and it was a two-way street. The intelligentsia was very, very interested in meditation, and the Zen master, who tended to be of the intelligentsia themselves, often having received a classical Chinese education of the type that would prepare them to take the exams if they had so desired. Um, they were social equals. This is one aspect of it. But as Schulter very astutely points out, uh, since how can I put it, on both the local and the national level, um, the public monasteries. Are people familiar with this distinction? I'm wondering.
Yeah, but we don't want to spend too much time on it. But there's the
Okay.
public monasteries, the private monasteries, right? And
Yeah,
the public
correct.
monasteries were supported by the government with as
Yeah.
many as 1,500 monks or so.
Well, yeah. I mean, the hereditary monasteries, the abbot was always chosen from the lineage of the original abbot. So it was like a family. The public monasteries were a separate style of monastery in which the abbot was selected by these scholar officials, either on the local level or on the national level when you got to the top, like in the Five Mountain system. For example, this
Right.
was like, so the Zen masters were not only on an equal social level, talking with people who are often very interested in the Zen practice itself, but they had a reason to maintain good relations with the scholar officials because the scholar officials were the ones who, on both levels, were the ones who selected the abbots for the public monasteries.
Right.
So,
So Dahui, if I may, I did just in reference to your book, Dahui wrote these 62 letters almost solely to government officials, right? These were all very high level literati, is sometimes what would be considered the heads of any presidential administration today. Is that correct?
yeah, the ministers, people in charge of all of the basic functions of the government. This, as I mentioned, were chosen through the examination system and thus comprised, the most intelligent people in the country, basically. The
And
reason,
then he was at the, a very prominent monk, and he was very close to an official in the government. This guy named Zhang, I believe, right,
right?
who had a falling out because of wars going on and etc. politics. And because this Zhang and his faction fell out, Dawi was actually defrocked and sent off to the hinterlands for 15 years. He was taken away from his position in the monastery. He was no longer a monk, and he was sent off to the swamps of the
Well,
southeast. Right.
still continued as a teacher, right? But you're exactly right. A little bit of historical context is necessary, I think. The Song dynasty was divided into two major portions. The first portion, in which basically all of historical China was included in the Song dynasty, but in the 1100s, I believe, the country was invaded by the northern quote-unquote barbarians, the Jurchen, the Jin dynasty, who basically conquered the entire country south of the Yangtze. And the original Song dynasty government fled south of the Yangtze, where they were able to successfully stop the invaders, regroup, designate new generals who were actually quite successful in counterattacking the Jin. But this could easily go right. But at any rate, we have these two sections of China. The south, very, very prosperous. A lot of the Zen people had relocated there. But despite following the separation in the country, the military successes that the Southern Song was experienced under some very capable generals of retaking what the Jurchen had conquered. The new emperor running the Southern Song dynasty.
Yeah.
I go into this in the book a little bit more, but he turned out to have a stake in not having the Jurchen lose their control of northern China, because the previous emperor and the oldest son were being held captive by the Jurchen, which allowed the ninth son of the emperor to become the new emperor down in southern China. And he was afraid that if they reconquered the northern parts of the country, he would lose his position.
Yeah.
So at any rate, he had a lot of political stake in not letting this happen.
Yeah.
But there were a number of the intelligentsia, top officials, these very intelligent guys, capable military people, politically astute, who were very much against this sort of what they felt completely unwarranted peace that the emperor and his chief advisor had worked out with the Jin dynasty. So these very, very influential people who were very opposed to the policy of the present emperor and his chief advisor, very, very inconvenient. And this is why a lot of these top people were exiled. Zhang, of course, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, was one of the most powerful of these, but it wasn't only him.
Yeah. Yeah.
People ended up exiled to various parts of the country, and a lot of these people had been Dahui's disciples, Zen disciples, even though there is no evidence that Dahui actually supported this political position. His association with these people resulted in him being exiled as well. First to sort of a mountain area, and later, as you said, to the southern and very malarial parts of China.
Yeah.
But it is thanks to this that a lot of these letters exist, because he had to communicate with his old disciples by letter.
Yeah. Well, let's jump into his teaching.
Okay.
Yeah. So one of the things he's best known for is Wato, the word head, and this is, what's interesting is that this is a meditation method that we use even today, where you take just a piece of a koan, and he talks about a dry turd or a dry shit stick, or he talks about no, does a dog have Buddha nature or not? No, and you take that word head and you just soak into it, and this is what he was advising, and the teaching that he created 800-900 years ago is still being used at Pacific Zen and around the world today, which is really one of the most interesting things about Dahui. But he says, if you notice in yourself even the slightest deluded thought, don't attempt to forcibly eliminate it, but rather lightly replace the thought with your Wato, with the koan. To limitlessly relax is to receive limitless power, he writes.
Mm.
Please proceed in this way. Don't consciously wait for awakening. Awakening will come of itself. So it's really great because he's such a forceful personality, but he's got this really gentle side to him. This is how you quite gently practice. Do you have any thoughts about Watto?
Yeah, actually, this is something you're going to have to sort of like get me to shut up on, I'm afraid, if I get going into this. But very, very interesting because it does relate. I ca- to me, it seems to relate very much to this whole question of silent illumination. Now, as Schluter, I think, very correctly points out, silent illumination. Um, I have it here in the book. If any of you do have it, it's on page 21. But it's basically the way that Zen meditation was always practiced. In other words, to maintain a mind that is completely open, uh, very, very aware, free of thoughts. I mean, if you go back to like Linji, his famous statements about the practice of Zen meditation, don't continue thoughts that have already arisen, and don't let those that haven't yet arisen be aroused. Just this will be worth far more to you than 10 years pilgrimage. Dahui himself gives almost the perfect, I think, definition of what real silent illumination is supposed to be. This very moment, just cease to entertain thought, putting an end to the confused mind. Then you will know that there is no delusion to be destroyed, no awakening to be aspired to, and no discriminatory thought to be cut off. With time, erroneous views will disappear of themselves, and you will be like a person drinking water and knowing for himself whether it is hot or cold. The mind that is, this is very crucial, I think, the mind that is clearly aware of discriminatory thought taking place. How can this mind possibly be obstructed? How can there possibly be any other kind of mind than this one? This is something he goes back to again and again. But
Yeah.
the problem is that, as I'm sure everyone in this everyone here knows, just stop. You know, don't continue thoughts that have already arisen. Don't let those that have already arisen, that haven't yet arisen, be aroused. Easy to say, but we identify so strongly with self. I mean, these thoughts basically we construct our ego. This is almost impossible. I mean, speaking only for myself, I found this basically impossible to do. And what I wasted years in the monastery doing was attempting to forcibly stop thinking, completely misunderstanding what this sort of advice is intended to do. So,
Well, that's one reason I really appreciate his guidance to rather lightly replace the thought
mm,
with your koan. Just
right.
come back lightly to the koan rather than the traditional, perhaps Japanese way of boom, 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 samurai, 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 right?
He is seeking, and this is also very interesting to me, just stopping thought, just looking at the mind prior to thought, again, is actually such a very difficult way to do, a thing to do. Um, what is a better way to do this? And this is the way I've heard it described not only by Dahui, but by several Zen masters who I really like, Yamakawa Roshi at Shogenji Monastery, but also by other teachers. The reason that a lot of these teachers are very, very strict with the koans and keep pushing you, the idea is that you're working with a watto, which basically doesn't make any sense, and you have to come up with a response. But there is no kind of logical explanation or response that's possible. But the Roshi is pushing you. Something also inside the practitioner, I think, has to be pushing the practitioner, or just the Roshi pushing you, I don't think really works all that well. But at any rate, the point is, and Dahui explains this, it appears to me, that you get to the point where there is no explanation, no workings of the logical mind can come to a resolution of this problem you have been presented with. So you end up finally just being at the end of your wits, and the mind stops working. I mean, the logical mind stops working, and you become okay with not being able to logically understand. And it's that kind of monkey wrench thrown into the logical mind that will finally precipitate a state of mind that is prior to thought. This is the way that Yamakawa Roshi explained it to my friend Jiun at Shogenji after years and years and years of practice. Shinzen Young has a very, very good explanation of this, actually, I thought. That the answer to the koan comes from this mind that is perfectly okay with not knowing. I've seen that explanation used also by some Korean masters. Just be okay with the mind that doesn't have to understand, doesn't have to conceptually understand anymore. So he came up with this system, and I think, it, as I probably said last time, as my friend Priscilla Daiichi Storant at Sogenji in Okayama, who has done interpretation for how the Shodo Roshi for I don't know how many hundred people. She said it's a system that seems to work very, very well for maybe 1/3 of the students she's worked with. Helping the Roshi. There's about 1/3 where it sort of works, and there's a 1/3 where it doesn't. It for various reasons it doesn't work at all. The koans frighten some people, she said, or the only thing that is driving them to work on it is the Roshi. They're doing it purely for the Roshi, and they get nowhere. There are other people that are very intuitive and seem to come up with the answer to the koan without any transformative growth at all, correct? Somehow their minds, some quality of mind allows them to understand what the koan is driving at. But
well, how was it? How was it with you? You were 10 years a monk. You've been meditating for a very long time. How have koans been for you?
Yeah. Well, I think, maybe I probably was discussing this a little bit. I'm one of the people they didn't really work for. I mean, people say, what? You just translated all these books of koans. I can translate them, but what happened with me, I think Zen can be rather dangerous for compulsive personalities. And I am a bit of a compulsive personality, very literal minded. So I've never done well with poetry. It takes me a while to catch like illusions and symbolic thought often. So koans are used in various ways in the Japanese monasteries as well. But this sort of monkey wrench in the logical mind sort of approach that I think is how it's working with the people that really get it. This is the impression I have. I was just not getting it. I ended up completely stuck, getting more and more tense, trying to force it. Basically, the answer, I was just doing it for the Roshi, and there was no kind of inner drive there. It just was not. It's very, very frustrating for me.
We talked about this yesterday a little bit, and the question was whether it was cultural or not, and is it the person specific? And in my mind, anyone can get it.
Yeah.
And I've seen many people get
I
it.
agree.
And so I have to, in listening to you, look at the system in which you were in, and I have to question whether it was the right system for you, perhaps as a person or as a foreigner.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. Obviously, a lot of Westerners have done very, very well with the koans, I think. Jiun, again, this friend of mine at the monastery, been there like 20 years now here in Japan. He really likes the koans, frustrating though they are for him constantly. He says they're really quite fulfilling for him. And, a number of Paradoroshi's students have done very, very well with them. So I do think, yeah, it is not culture. It's not because it is a Far Eastern culture that they work here in Japan and in China. I think you're very right. Individual differences are the ones that determine largely, I think, whether it's going to work with a particular individual. Uh, I don't think it was the system for me. Something more systematic and logical, like certain types of vipassana practice, have been far more fulfilling for me. I
Mm-hmm.
really needed a lot of context. I had to know what the problem was and why meditation. I mean, without getting into specifics, why the general endeavor of meditation and what it's trying to do with the human mind, why that is a resolution to the kind of problems I was feeling, and what the root of that problems were. That Zen
Yeah.
explains nothing about that, really. Not certainly not here in Japan. And
No, not in Japan. And I think I find it very interesting that Shinzen Young, who actually has very little training in Zen, uses a lot of Zen techniques, and I fully respect his system. And Eckhart Tolle, who you really like quite a bit, he's an interface with Vipassana, with meditation techniques that are thousands and thousands of years old, based in obviously out of Asia. So you're sitting in the middle of Japan with this great Zen tradition, and you're reaching out overseas for ways to interpret it, that in some ways that which you originally came to Japan for. And I salute you for that. I think that's really great, and I think that you should be doing that. If somebody were to ask my opinion, and there's no need to, but so
no, thank you.
I think that's wonderful. Yeah. Can we touch on Dahui just a little bit more, and
Sure.
how active that he was? He was, you mentioned Linji, and you quoted some of Linji, I guess, but also he was considered the second coming of Linji by some, and I look at that, and I think that some of it is his energy level. He says, an official says, well, I'm playing Go with my friend, and he writes, well, go to the Go game, and before they separate the tiles between black and white, flip over the table and then ask him, what do you think of this? So
I'd forgotten about that one.
yeah, so there's this quality of energy that Dawi, it clearly has, that Linji had, but also I think one thing about Dawi is that he's very articulate internally with regard to what's going on in his mind, and what's going on in his emotions, and very, not just articulate, but very accepting of that. And I think Linji had, I think of all the classical teachers, perhaps, Linji was most astute in understanding sort of the workings of the human mind in some way. Some things that Dawi would say, the sole thing you lack is sufficient is faith, which comes right out of Linji. And you should redirect your aspirations towards investigating the very spot on which you stand, which is, Linji would say, wherever you are, always take the position of host. Have you heard those comparisons much before?
Uh, Not explicitly. I agree with you, certainly on the energy level. There's something about these great masters where the well springs of energy, I think, come from this unbelievable, complete lack of resistance to the present moment. Maybe I could put it that way. Um, Dahui would receive a communication from somebody and said, "Oh, I'm just dashing off this letter with whatever comes to mind," and then produce a completely coherent, logically developed letter that goes on for pages uh, that he just sort of wrote on the spot, send it off, and the production. I mean, this, of course, the letters that appear in the collection of his letters are just a tiny fraction of the letters that existed at the time of his death. But a very capable editor, scholar official went through it, and a lot of it, of course, just like letters that I write to people. It's repeated material. He has the same message for people, so there was no point in publishing all of this stuff, but a selection that gave a broad of view as possible. But anyway, the amount of teachings he produced in these wonderful letters he was writing just goes. I mean, and the speed and the spontaneity with which he produced this speaks of a level of clarity and energy that very, very unusual. The fact that he remained in such good health completely uncomplainingly in these very, very trying situations. And in fact, that was a big part of his teaching. I mean, you pointed out a page here, 184, uh, where he's just talking about accept your situation as it is.
Do you want to? Can you read that?
Sure.
It's a little bit of a long paragraph.
Yeah. And now this is interesting because, as I was saying to you, it was a very, very difficult passage to interpret. Basically, he's talking to one of his students who is someone who was having a lot of trouble in his practice, actually. But he said, "Juren, entrust totally in things just as they are. Again, faith. Let go. No, faith is to entrust completely." Harada Roshi also always talks about this, samurai though he is, entrust totally in things just as they are. With a Buddha, accept as is. With an ancestor, accept as is. This is my attempt to translate what is in Japanese kaku no gotaku, which means just as it is, but it also can mean to accept, but also to do. I explain this in a note. Anyway, with a Buddha, accept that is. With an ancestor, accept as is. With awakening, accept as is. With delusion, accept as is. With doubt, accept as is. With life, accept as is. With death, accept as is. With being in the midst of the deluded passions, accept as is. With annihilation after death, or non-annihilation after death, accept as is. This was a big issue for Juren. What happens after death? With being at the court and serving as a minister, accept as is. With living in the quiet surroundings of a Taoist monastery, accept as is. With living on Mount Jing in a community of 1,700 monks, as Dahui did at certain times of his life, accept as is. With being defrocked and living in Hangzhou, accept as is. Juren, do you entrust totally? With entrusting totally, accept as is. With not entrusting totally, accept as is. So in the end, what is it? It is just as it is. Just as it is. Just as it is, too, is just as it is. But I wrote.
I have, Tom, may I interject here? There's a single reason why I asked you to read that.
Yeah.
And that's because yesterday when we were speaking, You told me a story about when you were a young monk
Yeah.
in a temple at Kenshoji in Japan, and you had an experience that was, from what I understood, accept just as is. Can you tell us about that experience and if this resonates at all in Dahui's writing?
Well, now that you mention it, yeah, I think you're right. Um, yeah, I had been a lay monk. I had been in Japan for 5 years or so at that time, and started my Zen practice just going to a temple in the morning at first, and then started living in a temple as just an ordinary lay person, and then decided I'd like to taste monastic life, so I went to Shofuji under a very well-regarded master, Yamada Mumon, at that time, because he had practiced as a layperson for many, many years. So he was allowing lay people, unordained people, to come in and live just like a training monk. So I went and spent 3 years there, and then I decided I wanted to get ordained because, well, because I had no options. I mean, I really was at the end of my rope at that time in my life. If I'd had options, I don't think I would have continued. But I felt like, okay, I've got to go deeper into this. So I did decide to get ordained, and I knew the master at Kenchoji, who I had wanted to study under, but you did have to be ordained to enter Kenchoji. Anyway, I entered there, and a few months after entering, I kind of ran into a wall where I got, uh, once you enter formally into a monastery, you have a sponsoring priest involved. You have, you're in a formal position. You're not free to walk away anytime you feel, although some people do. But I felt that I was kind of stuck in this situation, and yet somehow for some reason I was saying, wait a minute, this is not going anywhere. I got anyway very very depressed. To I was suicidal actually. It was kind of manic depression, and that went on for a number of weeks. And one time I was working with another one of the monks on a small project, that involved like some kind of record keeping, and he knew that I was going through some problems here. So he told me, "Why don't you lie down and just rest a moment?" So I laid down, and I felt myself going into the physical, the depressive side of the manic depressive cycle, which is it's an intensely physical feeling. So anyway, just out of nowhere, the idea popped into my head. Even if the entire rest of my life, even though I should live 70 years, even if every moment of this is so bad, is this bad, I have to leave it to the will of God. And in that instant, all of the physical symptoms and depression self just suddenly disappeared completely. And I was at Kenshoji for 4 years altogether, and they never really came back. And actually, I ended up enjoying Kenshoji life very much. It was exactly what I had been doing when I was so depressed about the life there. And I remembered something I had heard once, someone saying, it was like all the mirrors turned into windows. Mirrors, you're just reflecting yourself, but all the mirrors turned into windows, and all of a sudden, oh, there's this wonderful scenery around you. So I actually enjoyed my 4 years at Kenshoji enormously. But yeah, and later, some people said, "Wow, that sounds like a wonderful kind of enlightenment experience." But as I told you, a Christian monk friend of mine said, "No, that's not really enlightenment. I think that's a conversion experience," which I thought was very accurate because I didn't feel it was an enlightenment experience either. Uh,
Had you
it was,
had an enlightenment experience before?
well, we have, that's a very good question.
So how would you know what
Yeah,
enlightenment experience feels like?
that's exactly on target. But I think my intuition was correct. It wasn't really an experience of self-understanding. Um, and we, of course, have all sorts of illusions about what enlightenment is, and they didn't fit those illusions. But more than that, it's not that I felt I had accepted the situation, but I had I think, a correct intuition that I hadn't really understood myself. I mean, that, uh, that, how do I express it? That about ego, which comprises the root of suffering. I hadn't really understood that. I had understood what was causing my suffering in this situation and just was able to completely let go of it. But I hadn't seen through the root of the problem, and I knew that somehow.
Mm.
That's all I can really say.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, it's just as is, after all, right?
Just as is in that situation, yeah, I was able
Yeah.
to accept being at Tenchoji as it is.
I think that's exactly what Dawi is saying.
Uh-huh. I just
Let's
want to.
shall we jump into Dawi's some of his other I'm sorry, did you have something to add, Tom?
No, no, this could go on forever. So I think you should keep me on course here.
So one thing I wanted to touch on that you mentioned Miriam Levering, and she's like a professor from University of Tennessee, and she didn't even publish her doctoral thesis, but it's about Dawi, and it's called about it's called Dawi and the Layman, and it's about the unavoidable business of life, as Dawi says, and how supportive Dawi was of the lay practice, even though he was so obviously engaged and linked to the whole monastic system. His monasteries would have 1,500 monks, of which he mentioned that he would do 100 doksans, 100 meetings, koan meetings with students in a morning. So you could just imagine the kind of work that he was carrying out with monks. Yet he had time for lay people, he had time for the lay people, within the government, and I'm sure the lay people out in the community as well. But he says of the great matter, if I might just read this bit, the great matter is not something that can only be resolved through long training under an awakened teacher or extensive practice in Chan monasteries. In monasteries nowadays, many are the monks with white heads and yellow teeth who remained unawakened. And many are the monks now to the assembly who, with a single shove, new to the assembly, with a single shove, are transfigured and understand everything. The order in which people awaken to an aspiration for the way does not determine the order in which they attain awakening. So very, very clear understanding of communities of people, of communities of practitioners and stuff, but also, from my mind, very supportive of the lay community. He says again, the matter doesn't needn't involve lengthy stays in monastic communities or extensive training under a teacher.
Mhm. Right? I mean, for several reasons, I think. Of course, what are we dealing with? We're dealing with something we always have, which is a point that Dali comes back to again and again. This mind that is so distraught and looking for answers and everything. What is that? What is it behind there? I don't know exactly how to put it. And this is, of course, obviously the same. Buddha nature is the same, whether you're ordained. Something that Muso Soseki, the Japanese master, comes back to again, not a hair's width of difference between sacred and mundane. When you really see what it is that is seeking. But again, concrete examples like this layman Zhang, uh, who had a realization, according to Dahui, that was second to none. An extremely deep realization, and to the point where he became a bit of a fundamentalist, was not willing to accept grandmother Zen, this wishy-washy, which was something that Dahui disagreed with him quite sharply on and criticized Zhang quite sharply about. But that attitude, this sort of very elitist attitude that Zhang developed. Um, but yeah, I think, as you were saying also yesterday, in order to help the lay people, is one of the main reasons. That's just, one, of course, Miriam Levering's point. It does seem to have been developed largely. We don't know because he wasn't really writing letters to monks. He was communicating directly with them. But it does seem to have been developed largely to help lay people. Even the present day master of Engakuji, I'm translating a series of his talks about just Zen history and anecdotes about the Zen masters, and he says that much, that this is something that is very much directed toward helping lay people. And well, my own idea about that is that for lay people with all of the distractions, this sort of, as Schluter, I think, correctly says, the traditional way of doing Zen practice throughout Zen history, pretty much up until the time of Huan Wu and Dahui, who systematized it more, was silent illumination. Just drop the present thought and don't give rise to the next one. And you really do almost need a monastic environment to create a silent, a more settled, quiet environment. None of the constant distractions of just a daily life, running a family, running a business, running a government ministry. So I think Dahui realized that these people need a crisis. Crisis keeps you occupied, even if you're busy. Like if your son is going to die, you're going to be thinking about it all the time. So for the people for whom the koan became their problem, and I think it's just as true nowadays for lay people here and monks too in Japan, the koans really work for people who receive the koan and it really becomes their problem. And something is pushing them to resolve it. And they can't rest until. And that sort of thing will stick with you, even if you're busy. And I think that this is sort of my take on it, and this is why it proved to be very effective for these extremely intelligent people who often probably had very, very deep spiritual questioning inside, but needed something for that to crystallize around. And the right koan for a person could really do that. I mean, this is what happened with Dahui, when he was practicing. He said he doesn't recall himself actually, devoting himself day and night to seated meditation. It was just an everyday life thing for him. And when his great enlightenment, his initial great enlightenment, the vines of being and non-being and twirling a tree, what happens when the tree falls down? But anyway, when he was working on this koan, after a prior awakening, but this is the koan that really got him, they say he was eating dinner with Wan Wu and one of Wan Wu's guests, and he was so enthralled in the koan that he forgot to eat. It's just sort of, and Wan Wu said to his guest, "Oh, this monk is doing boxwood Zen." Boxwood is a tree that takes forever to grow and even gets smaller during leap years. It was this constant absorption in the koan and the activities of everyday life that finally led to this breakthrough. So it was partly as a result of his own experience, even in the midst of his duties as a monk, outside of the hours of meditation, this was occupying him.
He was Dahui was also very supportive of women, right? And he ordained a number of women, and they became his successor. He's sort of famous for that.
I would certainly fit the pattern if I could.
Miao Zhang, Zhejiang,
Right.
yeah.
Did Jimmy?
Just really brilliant women.
Yeah. Well, even today, I am constantly impressed by the Chinese I meet, and the way they go about things. I spent a few weeks in China after one of the many things I've done in Japan. It's go to acupuncture school and graduate from acupuncture school. But we took a trip to Shanghai to visit the Eastern Medical University there as a kind of graduation trip after the 3-year course in the acupuncture school in Japan was finished. So anyway, we were there in Shanghai, and I was on the second floor of the dormitory that we were given to sleep in, and I got up very early in the morning because of the change, and 5 o'clock a.m., cold morning in early April, looked out of the window, and the entire athletic ground at that time of the morning was filled with students walking around, going like this. And so at breakfast, I asked our Chinese guide, so all these students walking around the athletic field holding books, what are they doing? Oh, they're memorizing their textbooks. So I said, this is back in 1988. And I said, boy, China, America's finished. People study like this.
Tom,
yeah.
Before we go to questions, you and I talked about something, and I'd like if you feel like you could share it with people, because I think it's such a touching story about when you were 47 years old, you discovered that you had cancer, and I wonder if you could tell us about that and what transpired.
Well, yeah, okay. Well, I'll give you the whole thing. I mean, some people will dismiss it as complete nonsense, which is okay. By all scientific knowledge and medical knowledge, it is nonsense. But yeah. Anyway, I had a health breakdown. After I left the monastery, I lived in Kyoto for a while, and then I got an offer from Nanzan University, which is a Catholic university in Nagoya that had a institute for interreligious dialogue. So that's why I was invited, I think, to work as the copy editor there. Very nice place, wonderful colleagues, leafy campus. Probably would have stayed there until retirement years. But at the age of 47, I started developing very strange physical symptoms. After a small injury, I don't know, things just started going downhill for some reason. I thought it was heart problems at first, and then it sort of became like nervous problems, and the doctors couldn't find anything wrong. I went back to America for a month, and they checked it out, and they couldn't find anything wrong. They didn't do any like in-depth examinations, but this is probably stress, they said. It's completely unstressful environment. But anyway, I went back to Japan, and I stopped being able to eat, basically. Just a few mouthfuls. I wasn't digesting. I was completely constipated for like months, and was down to eating like a couple mouthfuls of food a day. And I lost a third of my body weight. I spent a month in a hospital here in Japan that specialized in Eastern medicine. They were giving me all sorts of concoctions, and I was just getting worse. So I finally went back to America again, and the doctor that saw me said, "Well, you need a CT scan. Something wrong here." And the report came back. You've got a you've got a tumor in your pancreas, 3 centimeters long and 1.5 centimeters wide. My father was employed. Well, he was professor of otolaryngology, ear, nose, and throat at Yale. So of course he knew the best people in medicine, surgery, in New Haven. So he introduced me to the best surgeon that he knew, and the surgeon looked at the CT scans and checked checked me out, and the skeletal remains. He said, "Well, okay. I mean, it looks operable. We can schedule for you for surgery in 2 weeks from now. I can assemble a team and we can do this." And the edges of the tumor are fairly clear, so we're not going to have to do radiotherapy or anything. But anyway, let's schedule for surgery in 2 weeks. So at any rate, my family is a lot of religious members, and this is maybe a significant part. I don't know, but my mother signed me up for the prayer list of a monastery, the patron saint of which was Saint Jude, who was also the patron saint of lost causes. And my brother, who is a fundamentalist Christian, was praying for me, a doctor, but also a fundamentalist Christian, and other relatives. And anyway, I was doing some meditation. I was so thin at that time that I could do full lotus for a couple hours without a twinge of pain. There was no flesh left to hurt anymore. So anyway, this is very strange. I mean, I know that Zen doesn't want to think too much about experiences that can only be called supernatural. But anyway, one night I couldn't sleep very well, so I was sitting meditation for a while. I don't know how long, and then decided to go to bed. And got into my bed, and I heard a voice in the room. I've heard other people say similar things. The disembodied voice, the proverbial voice in the room, you are healed. And I just felt, that's true. I mean, I had no doubt about what the voice had said. And I was scheduled to go in for a checkup the next day at the hospital, and I told my father about that. I said, I had this very strange experience last night. So this is one of the reasons I remember it. It's not something I sort of a created memory that happened later. But he said, "Yeah, you're just trying to get out of the surgery on Monday." But at any rate, on Monday morning, I went in to the hospital and immediately went to the operating room. And anyway, scheduled for a Whipple procedure, which is what they do for cancer of the pancreas. Take out the gallbladder, the duodenum, and as much of the pancreas if they have to, and then sew you up, and God bless you. I mean, survival rate is something like 2%. 2 years, so I don't know. I mean, basically it's a death sentence. So at any rate, it's a 7 or 8 hour operation. And my sister, who is a physical therapist, and she's a member of the medical profession, I let her sit outside of the operating room. So she was there with her book, reading, and after an hour and a half, uh, the surgeon came out. This is this was the best surgeon in New Haven, as far as my father knew. He knew everybody basically in town. So anyway, after an hour and a half, he came out, and my sister said, "What happened?" And he said, "Well, uh, Mrs. Jackson, I looked at all of the evidence that I had for your brother and just his physical condition. I was convinced that he had a very bad cancer of the pancreas that had metastasized to the liver. And yet when I opened him up, there's nothing there at all. So I took a biopsy from his pancreas and I gave it to the pathologist. And he checked in under the microscope and he said, Dr. Stein, there's nothing here but healthy tissue. So, I checked his entire gut, everything I could check, nothing wrong anywhere. So I sewed him up, and that's all I could do. So anyway, I heard all this from my sister when I came out of the anesthesia in the recovery room. And the next day, I talked to Dr. Stein came and visited me. And I said, well, doctor, I heard I gave you a bit of a surprise yesterday. And he said, I've never seen anything like it. I have no explanation for what happened. So anyway, yeah, when I got back to Japan months later, I told a doctor I had been teaching English to for a number of years before, and he said, Tom, I've done a lot of cancer surgery, and I can't tell you how many times I've gone in there and found things to be worse than I expected, but nothing at all. A surgeon doesn't decide to do surgery, in a situation like anyway. So it was a very strange experience. I mean, I had basically given up on meditation after leaving the monastery at the age of 34 in 1984. Like I said, ended up at Nanzan in a very pleasant job, but that experience, when death becomes a concrete fact facing you, you realize how short life is. It's like a shimmering collection of memories that you don't even know if it happened. What was this, a dream? And the feeling that, you have to take responsibility, the sort of felt sense that and it's sort of a felt sense that you have to take responsibility that for how you've lived your life. And if you've ended up living your life in a way that kind of betrayed yourself, there's nothing worse than facing death with that feeling. So anyway, yeah, that's why I decided to quit my nice cushy job at Nanzan and leave. And I had a lot of connections here at Tenryu-ji. So yeah, everything just sort of worked to make it possible for me to come here to Tenryu-ji, and that's why I ended up here and started my practice again. So yeah, in the Eastern Orthodox Church, they say, if you want to follow the spiritual life, you have to have tasted death. And they also say you have to have seen the face of God in someone. I thought I had seen the face of God in people earlier. That's what inspired me to come to Japan. People like Shibayama Zenkei Roshi and a few of the other Zen people I had met. But yeah, I think you really have to have a felt sense of death before this practice really makes sense, in that you can have faith in the sense of being willing to give it all up. So anyway, yeah, that's pretty much the whole story.
Mm.
I don't know. What do you do with an experience? I don't know.
Yeah.
I just
Well,
felt
what when did you begin your translation work after that?
was after that. Yeah,
So
I
this was an inspiration for you to take up this.
well, yeah, I had been interested in a few texts from early on because I had been hearing about them all the time. Muso Soseki's Dream Conversations was one of those texts.
Mm.
And then that's sort of why I ended up, plus the fact that I came here to Tenryu-ji and he was the founder of Tenryu-ji. And this was another one that I just sort of kept coming up, in the readings that I was doing on Zen. So yeah, when I came back to Kyoto after Nagoya, uh, this job at the International Research Institute for Zen Buddhism at Hanazono University, just someone offered it to me. And since I was kind of part-time, not full faculty, I didn't have any teaching duties and just could sort of work on my own projects. So the first one that came up was a request to like finish all the work that Soseki had done on the Rinzai, the record of Rinzai. So this is just editing all the immense work. But yeah, then, what's going to be my next project? And Tenryu-ji asked me to do dream conversations, and the people at Sogenji wanted me to do Entangling Vines. That's also a very important koan collection that they use in Rinzai Zen. And then this just seemed, okay, well, Harada Roshi at Sogenji started doing teishos on this. So I said, well, this is a great impetus to start doing this. So yeah, it's just sort of one thing led to another.
Well, it's a wonderful, wonderful thing that you've done, Tom. These translations we use daily and depend very heavily on them. And I just really enjoy the quality of your translation and the depth of your footnotes and the dedication that you obviously bring to it and bring to your practice.
Well, it's the translation. It's good for someone who's compulsive. So you have to be a little bit obsessive compulsive to do this stuff. But yeah, I enjoy it. So.
We have time from John Tarrant, the director, or Allison Atwell, senior teacher at Pacific Zen here. If you guys have any comments or any questions.
Hi. Yeah, I'm very touched, Tom. It's nice to hear you talk and just the heartfelt quality of your path, really. And I think, one of the things I thought Dahui taught me, to the extent I learned anything, was that you can't really summarize practice. You can't have, it's a Taoist thing. A true traveler has no fixed destination, no set time of arrival. And even though I do want this particular destination, and I actually want it like next week, but in actual fact, I don't really when I really look. And there's something tremendously tender and touching about your story. It doesn't fit into that. If you put a straitjacket around, it doesn't fit, and you can't put boards on the side of it, so to keep it in a disciplined path, and so it's beautiful. And in a way, that's better. It's not going to make sense. You get gifts from the universe that aren't going to make sense. And
well,
go ahead.
One of my conclusions was we just simply do not know what's out there. We have no idea what's possible and what's not possible. So, yeah, I guess be open to the mystery.
Yeah, we don't know what's possible, and that's kind of nice. That it's vast beyond our imagination, and I've always relied on that. Actually, I've always thought that the Koans sort of relied on that rather than trying to find fault with us for not getting the the other thing about koans I felt, apart from the vastness, is the involuntary gifts. It gives me things. Koans have always given me things I wasn't looking for and didn't expect and didn't think I was worthy of, or any of that stuff, So I'm just very touched to hear the dignity and beauty of your story. So,
thank you.
And I do want to thank you, as Jon did, for, and many people have, for your translation work is wonderful for us, because we're not in a monastery in Kyoto or anywhere else for that matter, and I could tell I wouldn't have fit very well. I was just at, where was I, Tofukuji, earlier in the year. And I could tell they wouldn't have liked me very much. And I mean, they're great, and I'm sincere, but it's just a cultural thing. I think some people would, and you probably found the best you could. But I think it's all right to stumble, in a way, maybe get defeated by the vast forces, and then you get the gifts of the Tao, So anyway, that's all I'm saying is I'm very touched, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
I was looking forward to, I was looking forward to, I'd like to come back to Kyoto and have tea together again. Things like that.
Oh, by all means, please get in touch.
Yeah. Okay.
Hi.
Hello. Yeah.
I think I was so just tremendously moved by your story and how it gave me personally the experience that practice is real. And I could experience it and see it in your face, and then through that experience that you didn't need to explain it. And the mystery was all through it. And it came alive. And we were there with you. And I was your sister sitting outside the operating room. And, just how marvelous all of that was. And then I've been reading the letters that you translated, the Dahui letters, and I had a question for you. First of all, I loved that you included the Chinese letters, the characters. It gives a feeling, even though I don't recognize a single one, it somehow changes the entire book to have them in there. So that was just beautiful that you did that. And then the question I have, two questions. One, in terms of context, did you have the letters that the people wrote to Dahui, or did you just have his responses? Did you have both?
Yeah, we have to rely, of course, on the Dahui material that remains. I think there's it's funny, the Chinese are interesting in that, for example, when they translated the original Sanskrit sutra material into Chinese, once it was translated into Chinese, they just got rid of the Sanskrit originals. They were not interested in them anymore. So the only Sanskrit originals that were translated into Chinese that remain are those that Japanese monks who were in China at that time came across and said, "Oh, these are the originals of these wonderful translations you made. Well, I'll bring it back to Japan." And they were treasured here in Japan. But the Chinese didn't really see any remaining value for them once they were translated into Chinese. So the same thing seems to have happened with the letters. There were a lot of, since when Dahui died, and there was interest in, gathering his correspondence, most of the people that had received the letters are still alive. they were, of course, able to give them to the editor. But to the best of my knowledge, all of those letters have disappeared. And the only one that remains is one that a Japanese monk brought back to Japan and is now in the collection of the Tokyo National Museum. That's actually the one that I think this is from that particular letter that what I have on the cover here. So the only original letters that were written to Dahui are the ones that were included in the collection of his letters that became part of the Buddhist canon. And that happens to only be, I think, one or two letters. The beginning letter, the first 5 or 6 letters, I think, were written to the same person. And 2 of those letters are preceded by the letter that Dahui received from the person he is in. And I think there's one other person that the original letter is included. So basically, none of the other original letters, as far as I know, still remain. It's a great loss, I think, but yeah.
I think I wrote on the blurb of one of your books, I think it was the Entangling Vines, where I said, I use this book every day. And that's true. And so I do look at your material and your wonderful translation of Linji, and also, I guess I just want to say it's a great thing you've been doing. Thank you.
I think authors are always very happy to hear that someone is actually reading the books that they've written. So, I'm glad it is coming in useful to people. I personally would like to add, just as a general comment, I mean, I think because of my experiences and my various frustrations with certain aspects of the Zen training, to say that for me personally, I can fully understand why you've probably felt that the monastery would not have been a good fit. That's true of a lot of Japanese, very, very good meditators who are just, being a monk and being a meditator are quite separate things. Some very, very good monks who are just not meditators. Some very, very good meditators who just aren't monks and wouldn't fit into the life. And that's both Westerners and Japanese. So separate things. But I very much, for me personally, I very much liked, one thing I would like to say is, although I left the monastic life finding some frustration with the practice, that the life itself and the 10 years I spent there were an immensely valuable experience for me. Just like being in the army, hopefully not having to go through war, but just like being in the army is a tremendously maturing experience for a lot of young men. I think the monastery was a very, very important part of my life. Zen practice as a whole also, the koan system, for whatever reason, I think as John pointed out, largely individual, it just wasn't a particularly good fit for me. But the whole meditative endeavor has been enormously invaluable. I mean, it's indescribably valuable for me. I like, people ask, are you a Zen master? No, not a Zen master, certainly not a Rinzai master by any means, but I like to think of myself as maybe evidence that a person of quite ordinary attainments can still gain if you continue this practice long enough, it's going to have enormous value in the life of anyone who's willing to stick with it. I think good teaching, of course, is very important. This is one of the great developments in the West, I think. The teachers making a real effort. And I see this also in modern Zen masters because the same problems are coming up among the modern Japanese. It is now a much more psychologized culture and society than it was a few generations ago. So the good young Roshis like Harada Roshi, well, he's a new generation, not young anymore, but the Roshi at Engakuji and a few of the other very good Roshis are really making an effort to contextualize the practice a lot more. And I see this effort being made in the West, and I think it's very, very important for practitioners. You know, the geniuses are always going to manage somehow. You know, like the math geniuses where you don't have to lead them every step of the way, but you give them a few hints and you know, they go to graduate school in mathematics. People like me who have trouble with algebra, you know. But the people who have trouble with algebra still can gain enormously from mathematics. So help people get as far as they can. I think this is really the tremendous contribution that not just Zen, but the whole meditative endeavor with roots in Asia, I think tremendous contributions to spiritual life in the West now has come from teachers that are now, you know, as Westerners, learning to contextualize this in a way that makes it more accessible to people who aren't the geniuses. Okay, anyway, that's just sort of what I wanted to add. So.
It's a perfect place to end. This is a practice for we who are not geniuses.
There's a few geniuses out there too, fortunately. Those are the people that, you know, I think could carry things further, but so can. That's one of the things I liked about Shinzen, for example. He said he was so frustrated in the practice for years and years, and he was wondering, are these people talking about this stuff so that they get donations from me or something? And he tried this and he tried that, and finally things started coming together for him. And I said, well, that's something I can relate to. And in many ways, that what makes him a good teacher. He actually has he never was in a monastery, but he studied Zen for a few years here, I think, in Japan. And
yeah, he was ordained as a Shingon monk. I looked him up on Wikipedia before we came on. So, yeah. But also, don't forget Pacific Zen. A little plug for the local house here.
Right.
And so, yeah. Tom, do you have anything further?
That's about it. If in a few years you would like to hear the follow-up or whatever, I'd certainly be happy to join you again. I always enjoy these discussions with you and everyone here. So.
Well, you're a tremendous and a very generous guest, and as I said, you know, before and again, as John said, you know, the work you've done, the foundational work you've done, is doing tremendous help. Is giving tremendous help to people around the world, and I thank you for that.
Oh, thank you very much. It's very gratifying to hear.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you all. This ends our current session. We have another Luminary series next month with David Chadwick, a great and long friend of Pacific Zen, on Tassajara days, and it's the first of a 3-part series. So we'll hear his stories about his experience in a monastery, and then. The following month, we have Helen Twerkov, who's the founder and publisher of Tricycle, as you probably know. And she wrote a wonderful memoir published last year called Lotus Girl, which I read and really enjoyed. So I think you'll enjoy it as well. So thank you all for coming, and thank you all for supporting. Whatever comes in goes to our speakers. So it's important that we support our writers, translators, and artists. Good night, all.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. Very much.
Thank you, Tom, so much. Wonderful. Yeah, wonderful to have you. And we'll see you. Please give us another tour of your garden soon enough.
Oh, I'd be happy to. Okay. Sign off.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. Bye-bye.